Hello there. Early released prisoners will be put up in hotels whilst pensioners freeze to death after having their winter fuel allowances removed. Pure evil. What a grand day for the establishment uniparty system. They've managed to empty the prisons of serious offenders and force many a poor pensioner into the eat or heat dungeon, all on the same ruddy day. What a twisted country we live in. It must be totally and painfully obvious to all of us by now that neither civil servants nor politicians care one hoot or one jot about the victims of crime nor the vulnerable elderly, because they've started unleashing hardened criminals onto the streets without informing their previous victims, and decided, by a parliamentary vote in the House of Commons no less, to strip 10 or so million pensioners of their winter heating allowance. While MPs sit there in their highly secure debating chambers and offices, as well as getting expenses to pay for their second home heating bills. Yes, according to the Telegraph, the Chancellor herself, Rachel Reeves, relieved the Treasury of over 3,700 quid in energy support over the last 5 years, while her Labour colleagues took over 400,000 quid between them in the same period. So if MPs who can afford to buy second homes in London are so needy that their heating bills need to be paid, throughout the year I might add, then why not pensioners in the winter? But while they're engaged in all of that, Labour has decided to imprison as many of the far right as they can lay their hands on and give them lengthy prison sentences too, even though it means letting thousands of serious offenders leave our woefully inadequate prisons to free up cells for geriatric far-right social media warriors. And it's no good Labour blaming the Tories. It wasn't the Tories boasting that they'd make an example of the so-called far-right rioters, locking them up for full long-term sentences, so putting a huge unexpected pressure on the prisons, was it? And please do not forget that the now Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years, from 2008 to 2013, so he will be acutely aware about the state of our prisons, and more of that in a minute. Now they're in the pickle of having to admit that some of those of what I would call political prisoners might well have to be released early too. And on top of that, we have the spectacle of delighted prisoners being let out of prison well before they should have been and celebrating in the streets with champagne, new clothes and fancy cars. Not a good look for Keir the Kneeler Starmer, is it? But he says he's not happy about those scenes of celebration, despite one of them saying they were now a lifelong Labour voter because of their early release. 1,700 released yesterday and a total of 5,000 in the coming weeks. But on the celebrations of release, a Number 10 spokesperson said, "The situation is completely unacceptable. It is, however, the right thing to do to ensure that we did not face a situation where criminality would be left unchecked along the streets because we didn't have enough prison places. So this was a difficult decision, but it was the right thing to do to protect public safety." Yeah, all brought about by the need to lock up as many of the so-called far-right rioters for as long as possible. And according to reports, some of the victims of those convicts have not been appraised of these early releases. So those victims might just bump into them unexpectedly in their local supermarket. Makes you shudder, doesn't it? And to cap it all, if prisoners are homeless when they get out early, they are on the cards to be offered a nice warm hotel room. If an offender is at risk of homelessness upon release, said the Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, they will be housed in community accommodation. We expect to provide housing for the majority of offenders using existing provision, but should there not be enough provision, I have authorised probation directors to make use of alternative arrangements, including budget hotels as a temporary measure for the cases that we will see in the next few weeks. Well, I do gather that the Home Office has a running 5,000 bed surplus of empty hotel rooms hired at great cost so as to accommodate any surge in asylum seekers crossing the channel in their rubber dinghies. So adding a couple of thousand more hotel rooms for prisoners won't be much more than a blip in the accounts, will it? While pensioners worry about how they'll pay for their food and heating this winter. And the Mail says that domestic abusers and sex offenders were among the 1,700 people freed by Labour's early prisoner release scheme today, sparking fears of a ticking time bomb before more crimes occur. And as ever, the people who make these decisions, such as MPs, are totally isolated from any comeback should more people fall victim to some of these early releasees. And I haven't seen a peep from the government about fast-tracking deportations so as to empty our prisons either. No, they're more likely to be living in hotels and roaming our streets, aren't they? Now, this prison crisis is not a new thing. It didn't just happen. It is the culmination of decades of the lack of political will to address the problem. Prisoners don't vote and need punishing. So who cares? Now couple that with this wave of low-level crime we're suffering from, antisocial behaviour, shoplifting, mobile phone snatching and the rest of it, as well as rampant knife crime. Prisons have been crammed for ages, and the police and courts have had to limit jail time to the most serious new criminals accordingly. As well as police not dealing with low-level crime because no meaningful punishment will ever be meted out. And that's when people stop reporting low-level crimes, unless they need a crime number for reference on any insurance paperwork. This has just turned the criminal justice system into a redistribution scam, where those who want can take anything they like from those who have, with zero repercussions. And up go the insurance premiums for the law-abiding. As I said at the start, what a twisted society we now live in. And just to show how long this problem has been developing for, this comes from a 2010 UK Parliament report. The prison population has been rising, with an especially sharp increase since the mid-1990s. The Ministry of Justice attributes this to courts sentencing more offenders to prison each year between 1995 and 2002. Offenders staying in prison for longer because of longer sentences and a decline in parole rates. And tougher enforcement following release, leading to more recalls for longer periods. And it went on to say that the England and Wales prison population had nearly doubled between 1993 and 2010. And further, that the prison estate has been overcrowded since 1994. Now, I bet many out there have their own idea on what really caused that massive increase in crime, a cause that our political classes have thus far refused to acknowledge. All the political parties have failed us on law and order over decades, all of them, for at least 3 decades. And the straw that broke the camel's back was the addition of Keir Starmer's political prisoners.